That's really like the mystery of painting, and what keeps me coming back to the studio is trying to figure out what is it that's actually at work here. What are images doing? How do they function? And in a sense, that was my big departure into Western esotericism when I started to discover things like image magic, or even more simple things like making sigils, making talismans, astrologial imagery, how those images are thought to be these kind of centers or nexuses for kind of astral forces or something like that. And I was like, okay, wow, here's a tradition that gives this idea of image agency, the idea that images kind of have their own will or their ability to alter or make change in the material world. The Western esoteric tradition is one that really puts that at the forefront. And so when I was in school, I was really using that as a great example of how we can take those kind of methodologies and use them in the studio to understand the way that images might work.
Hello and welcome to the Blue Hour podcast, where we explore the minds and the worlds of visionary artists and creators. This week's episode is with visionary artist James Gardner, who explores the relationship between images and the esoteric. If you're new here, go follow us on Instagram at Roze Umbra, because we will soon be posting about the Visionary Art Grant that will be released in the next few weeks. To give you more information on James Gardner, he's a Montreal-based painter who bridges medieval and pre-modern imagery with contemporary explorations in alchemy and even neuroscience. By pulling from archives and his expansive collection of mnemonic images, James investigates how images don't just represent ideas, but actively shape how we think and experience the world. His paintings deconstruct and recombine historical iconography, transforming it into entirely new visual forms that reflect both personal subjectivity and collective memory. But his work doesn't just stop at the canvas. His immersive installations merge painting with sculptural image matter, evoking geological and architectural phenomena that explore cycles of growth and decay, much like the transformative processes in alchemy. He has been recognized by numerous awards like the TFVA's Artist Prize and Nancy Petrie's Award, and the Joseph Armand Bombardier Canadian Mastership Scholarship. So let's jump right in. Welcome, thanks for having me in your studio. It's a pleasure to meet you.
Yeah, welcome.
Yeah, I was excited for this podcast, like from what I was telling you earlier, just because it felt like our practice, not our physical works, but the way we think about art, seems like there's a lot of correlations. Mm-hmm. So I was excited to pick your brain on like, what is art for you? And like, what is your inspiration for art? But perhaps to start, do you want to just give people a basic, your background with arts and whatever you feel like describes you?
Yeah, no problem.
This time.
My name is James Gardner. I've been living and working in Montreal since 2017. Mm-hmm. I moved here for grad school, and then kind of through COVID, I kind of was able to stick around. I don't speak French, so I didn't think I'd be able to stick it out in Montreal, but a lot of amazing things have kind of fallen in my lap. Mm-hmm. So I've been doing that in Montreal for a while. I've been working at a wood shop as well and teaching painting at Concordia. So that's been keeping me pretty busy the last few years. As far as my art practice goes, I kind of grew up making a lot of drawings and stuff like that, but grew up in a pretty blue-collar city for the most part. So the only people I really knew that were making art were my high school art teachers. And so in my mind, I'm like, I guess I'll be like a high school art teacher. So when I went off to university, I was lucky enough to end up at the University of Guelph that had a very strong faculty for the fine arts. And they were the first people that kind of connected me a bit to the community in Toronto. And where I met some people that were, professional artists making a living making art. And I was like, I didn't really know that was something you could do in a way. And so that was kind of, after that, I was kind of hooked and stuck with it. So after my undergrad, me and a bunch of other students got together. We founded a small collective in Toronto called Versus. And that really helped me kind of establish myself in Toronto and really develop a studio practice as well as a collaborative practice. We had a small project space and ran a residency as well, so it really helped me kind of get immersed in the art scene. And then that project kind of ended around the end of 2016, and so it was time to investigate grad school. And
so then you went back to do your master's.
Yeah, I went back to do my master's
in Concordia.
At Concordia.
Okay.
I finished that in 2020.
Okay. Yeah, I find it interesting. We were discussing a bit earlier about like how the academia usually it's harder to integrate spiritual concepts, but it seems like the way you described it earlier, like maybe speak about like how was the reception of your work and what the themes of your work are in academia.
Yeah, sure. Well, I'll back up a little bit. I guess in probably around 2010 or so, there's a few books that I became aware of. There's a book called What Painting Is by James Elkins, and the book The Art of Memory by Francis Yates. So both of these texts were kind of my first introduction to mostly to alchemy, but through an extension, like the Western esoteric tradition, I guess I would call it. And so those were ideas kind of, I became really interested in it, kind of like all the reading I was doing was based in those subjects, but I found it really difficult to integrate that with my studio practice. I'd have like pictures of, old alchemical drawings and stuff up on the walls and trying to figure out ways to get them into my paintings and stuff, but nothing was ever really, I could never really connect it. And so when I did have an opportunity to go to grad school, I really wanted to see if I could incorporate those ideas more directly into my art practice. Mostly, I guess, alchemy being the kind of the largest one. But I quickly realized if I wanted to understand alchemy, I needed to understand things like astrology. And then I was like, if I want to understand astrology, I could maybe just learn how to use tarot cards and et cetera, et cetera. So it proliferated very quickly.
Yeah.
But yeah, when it was time for grad school, I was really curious to see how those ideas would hold up in an academic context. Even some of my old professors that were helping proofread or writing letters for me and stuff like that, they're like, be really careful about this mysticism passage in your application. Be careful of ideas of the occult and stuff like that. So it was really great to be in school and kind of test out those subjects.
So I guess with time and the back and forth of the reactions of your teachers, of your peers as well, you got to integrate this language, but it seems like from the get-go, it was always part of you. It was just a matter of when you're alone in your studio, you express it however you want, but as it comes a way of describing it to others, I guess. Was it the harder part?
Yeah, definitely. I guess I was more interested in figuring out what those experiences, what they were to me, I suppose. I didn't grow up a religious person. I wasn't ever, I was Christian, but in the Anglican church, I believe. But, we would go to church for funerals and weddings, and that would pretty much be it. And so, I don't have a lot of religious baggage, I guess you could say. But I wasn't very, I guess, interested in those subjects growing up so much, I guess. But what I was really interested in was making art, and I did notice through making art there was a few kind of strange experiences that would happen through making images, weird synchronicities, weird coincidences, whatever you want to call them. And I just felt like there was something strange happening in the process of image making and my relationship with images and how that how that it kind of becomes a screen for my subconscious or something, and there's just a reciprocal relationship between the two. So I started looking at that a lot closer. And when I discovered alchemy and Western esoteric stuff, it was like, this is actually answering a lot of those questions. I was finding a lot of, I guess, rabbit holes to kind of go into that were helping understand what it was that was happening in the studio.
Yeah, I'm curious then to go deeper in that. Like you said, there was a lot of synchronicities. Can you, do you mind sharing some of those?
I'd be happy to. Well, I do like that. I've heard a few people say, if you, like the phenomena, so whatever you want to call this experience, but like the phenomena is always kind of playful or a bit of like a trickster figure. And so when I describe these things, I feel like there's always like obvious explanations for them. So especially when I tell other people, it's easier for them to be like, oh, that's, because of A, Y, and B. Or
to dismiss it to something obvious.
Yeah. Because when I say them, it does sound kind of stupid or I'll just describe them and see how it goes. But I remember, it was way back in 2008. I was working on this painting, and it was a painting of an interior, and I started to draw this. It kind of looked like water kind of seeping onto the floor of the space that I was doing. Really kind of painterly stuff, like really, really thick blue paint, kind of like these drips that were flowing into the space. And I looked down at my feet, and at that moment, there was a leak in the other room, and so water was coming through the floor almost exactly like it was in the painting. And so it was just one of those things, and I was kind of like, that was really weird. And I mean, if you saw that studio space, you'd be like, oh, well, leaks happen in that room next door all the time. But that was the only time that leak ever actually came into my studio.
But then I'm curious, like, at the moment you saw the synchronicity, you're probably like amazed of that timing. But do you remember what your inner process was at the time that you perceived that?
Not so much. I was really just into the painting. I was just really having a great kind of all-nighter at the studio and just really concentrating on the image and how it was developing.
I'm asking that because water, like we just did your astrology chart, is a big theme in your life, and it is all about emotions. Water is the archetype of emotions, intuition, and a big part of your inner world is very watery, is very emotional, and so that this experience is the first one that you thought about sharing. I think it is meaningful and relevant. I don't know how, but it feels like seeing the flow of emotions. Sometimes I feel like when these things happen, it's almost like at some point I catch myself, okay, what is this trying to reflect back at me, this synchronicity? Because when you do like pick up on those things, one thing I've noticed, it makes you more present, because you're maybe like in your mind somewhere, and then something happens where your inner world and your outer world match, and then you're just like, whoa, and then you start paying attention to everything. And so that's usually like a mirror to reflect back something, like almost like a feedback loop. And sometimes when we're busy or we're stressed or something, we don't pick up on that signal to get this feedback right away and understand what our unconscious mind is trying to tell us about this situation. So that's why I was curious, but I feel there was perhaps something there even more like profound happening, being reflected to you. What do you have other synchronicities with water? Not
so much, nothing I can think of off the top of my head anyway.
Okay.
But it's a big part of my life. I definitely, I'm always, I love having a good bath, especially on like the full moon or something, or the new moon in particular. Swimming, like that's what I did all summer, swimming in the river and stuff like that. So it's very much, I make it a part of my life for sure.
And I'm sure that it's also part of your paintings, like in the way, I mean, it seems very, there's a lot of textures, there's a lot of layers. It seems very, it could translate to an emotional poem. I don't know, how would you describe your work in regards to that?
In regards to water or?
Water and emotions and...
I guess the theme of water has been the subject of a few paintings. That painting over there behind the camera, actually, that's a bathtub painting of me in the tub. I've got I discovered that the Saint James. So obviously, when I read that it was the same name as mine, I paid closer attention. He was also Saint James, the saint. He was a fisherman.
Oh, okay.
And thinking about I guess Christianity and a lot of these. The fish and those kind of water connections. So I made a painting out of that, made a picture of St. James fishing. And so yeah, those themes kind of creep up once in a while for sure.
And also like water is differently connected with intuition. And you said you do have almost psychic, whatever you want to call it, but very heightened intuition.
Yeah, especially in the studio. It's really about those... following those feelings, following those ideas that present themselves mostly through material process.
Okay.
Yeah, that's been very important.
And when you arrive to like a painting and you're like, okay, I think this is done. Do you have an example of a recent work that you analyzed afterwards and kind of, because for me, when I paint, especially my recent work, I know that I'm, projecting stuff from my unconscious on the painting. And sometimes I like to not analyze it until the end, but I always process it. And sometimes it takes a year to process all the layers and understand what's actually being programmed in the painting that is, sort of reflecting back something I need to process. Is that something that you have noticed in your own work?
Yeah, and it's always great when you get to live with the painting for a number of years, and it keeps slowly kind of opening up as the days go by. I think that's one of the strengths of painting is that slow looking, that slow realizations that kind of happen. But it happens in the process. making as well, where these connections and ideas sort of emerge. Maybe it's just because we're sitting next to this painting that it's on my mind. And I just mentioned that St. James fishing painting as well. In that original painting, it's a fisherman and he's holding a net. And I was thinking about this idea of the net and catching fish. And I really like that as kind of a metaphor for what a painting can be, as a way to kind of capture ideas or harness ideas. And then when I was working on this painting, it's very obscured right now due to the process, but there's it's St. Luke making a painting. And through my process, the paintings kind of get turned around and there's a lot of transferring that happens and a lot of kind of happenstance. But where that painting ended up, and this couldn't really have been planned, is exactly where that net was on the previous painting. Oh. And so it was like kind of, by following my intuition about where things are going to go in the composition, it's always surprising when there's these overlaps.
So this saint would have been where the net is in the other one.
Yeah, it's hard to see, but the net was like right in this section, and that's exactly where the painting is.
And it's like a diptych, or do they go together?
They're going to be a part of my next exhibition, but not next to each other necessarily. Okay. But who knows? We'll see.
Because like water and fish is very much related to the Piscean age that is kind of ending. So the past 2,000 years about Christianity, the age of Pisces is the age of spirituality. So that's why like we saw emerge so many different religions in the past 2,000 years.
Yeah,
each having a similar flavor but their own unique character. And the fish, is this kind of we are fish, and in another plane, in the spiritual plane, where like we are all connected to water, which is a metaphor for consciousness as well. So this is kind of like the age of interconnectedness to spirituality, if it would have turned out well. So I'm wondering if this was also is a theme that you've reflected upon, because there seems to be like fishermen, fish, Christianity seems to be like present in your work.
Well, I do in Western astrology. I am a Pisces, so I think that's always been a big.
Well, you have two planets in Vedic as well in Pisces.
Yeah. So no, it's definitely been a strong symbol in helping me understand myself, I guess, and my.
But also because in Vedic, my sun is a Pisces, and is often connected also with the collective. So because Pisces is consciousness, is connected with consciousness, it's like you can zone out from your personality, identity, and connect with larger truth that impact the whole of humanity, or bigger trends in the spirituality. Do you see your perception has brought you certain insight on that recently, on what's going on in the world? And
yeah, I think by looking at like Western esoteric traditions, it's really helped me, I guess, recontextualize the history of art, even the history of religions in a sense, and in counter to what I think is going on today, where it feels very divisive and very different groups kind of coming at each other. Through my studies, I realized that how much all of these things are really the product of, highly diverse populations, like, metropolises that have existed have always been a meeting place for many different cultures. And I think a lot of history of religion, the history of esotericism, many of those things are the results of those, that connection between many cultures and a place where ideas can come together and people can engage with them in different ways. And so applying that to the contemporary moment, it really feels like we've kind of lost that realization, where everyone's feeling like they've got to protect their own little corners, as opposed to realizing that we, are kind of always in this together. And that's the only way we're going to get out of these problems that we have as well.
Yeah, it feels like we've swung one side completely, only to realize that the only way out is going back in the past, how things might have been done. But I do think, from my personal perception, that it will be the uniting of, the collective and the individual. Like right now, it's only the individual. That's why, like, the word stars, right? There's stars. Yeah. They are these little balls of light that we adore and we praise. They're idols. But I think this, as like the thing we look up to, is gonna start, even with the DD case, like these things are, we're starting to see all the infrastructure underneath that's corrupt and that's been
right.
Leading us astray,
Mm-hmm.
thinking that we need to shine through our physical appearance, through our status, rather than through, our inner values. And so I do feel that all these truths are being revealed to show us that this does not work anymore.
Mm-hmm.
You don't want to be on star, like we're going to see the stars being falling in
right.
front of our eyes, in front of the cameras. And now I think maybe it's the beginning of something where we start to realize, like, okay, maybe there's some more, we need to cultivate that inner space that's been forgotten.
Yeah, absolutely.
And perhaps when we do that, then we become true individuals able to serve a purpose in the collective versus like always focusing on the external, and this creates division.
Mm-hmm.
So it feels like while we're filming this today, there is a lot of these structures, there's something and it's collapsing and the person drops with it in front of the public eye.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's crazy. Like big things, right? The Diddy case, I think, is just like we see one person, but everything that will come from this mess.
Yeah.
It's going to disrupt a lot of things.
Yeah.
And I think, like before, a lot of these things can be, you remember like the Balenciaga thing?
Mm.
Do you remember that campaign that got like called out recently?
I think so, yeah.
Because they were using like very infantile figures with like these pornographic enslaved, like with these kind of harness and
right.
something that was very wrong.
Yeah.
And they were called out on it and they kind of stood back. They went for like a week or two, like no, not too much noise, and now they're back. But I feel like the time where this is a possibility is ending, hopefully, slowly. Mm-hmm. When these things crumble, they crumble, and they make other things crumble instead of just like brush it under the carpet, wait,
yeah,
and then continue.
Yeah. And yeah, I think that was a big Aleister Crowley thing too. Like with his idea of the new aeon and stuff like that, he really thought that all of the institutions that that structure our society are going to crumble. Okay. And really, that's I think it's really presented itself clearly. Like even things that we didn't think were ever up for debate, like things like gender and stuff like that. We're in an exciting place where that's becoming. A very a big topic of a conversation, and then gender fluidity and those things, which even 15 years ago were not as widely understood as they are now. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I think going forward, it's really all the things that we could really stand on are starting to fall away from under us. It's exciting, and also a little can be a little scary.
Yeah, it is exciting, and it does reinforce, anyways, for me and a lot of people I've talked to, the sense of purpose. Because like when there's no emergency, sometimes like you feel this calling, but you just don't act on it because there's no emergency, and and I'll have to go out of my comfort zone if I do follow it. So I'll just wait until I don't have the choice anymore. Yeah. And now with these things crumbling, it feels like, okay, now I don't have the choice. Right. Like I have to start doing what I'm passionate about and what's been on my heart for so long. Mm-hmm. Because otherwise, like, you're just going to crumble with your old structures inside, that don't fit. Yeah. We are the reflection of what's going on. So,
yeah. And when you see so many people going through very hard times, like with everything that's going on today, it's that call to action feels all the more pressing when it's not just the normal status quo, where you feel like, okay, maybe it's time to act and do something, whatever it is that you can do. And
you're teaching at Concordia, so I'm curious, do you see, like, in the past, how long have you been teaching?
Since about 2019, give or take.
So a few years. Do you see any like trends? Because I feel like, of course, creators some of them are like observing what's trendy so that they can themselves integrate in the trends. But other people are like actually like trying to find their essence and channeling it. And often this becomes a mirror of something bigger, like sometimes they're visionaries and they can predict something. Mm-hmm. Have you noticed any themes that are coming a lot in those?
Well, I guess one of the biggest ones that I've noticed, and maybe it's just because we're at that like 20-year cycle from when I was doing my undergrad degree, is that a lot of the people I feel like it's the same people that I went to university with. I think it's because some of those like fashion trends are back. Like everyone's wearing like big baggy pants again, like I used to wear back when I was in my undergrad. So in some senses, it's comforting because it feels like, oh yeah, the kids are all right. Nothing's changed that drastically, other than there's a lot of subjects that we can be a lot more open about and talk about through our art and talk about in classes. Gender and stuff like that. Much more open to be discussed. But it still feels like it's ultimately the same, like we're all the same group of people,
Oh, interesting.
Which has been, kind of heartwarming for sure. But of course, I definitely feel the influence of social media and stuff like that on people creating. It's a lot of conversation right now between me and other teachers. A lot of students are asking about like their style in art making. They're like, oh, I need to find my style. I need to really identify with a certain way of making. And I think that's to an extent always been the case with artists, like having something identifiable if you want to be successful. But now with social media especially, it's like I think a lot of young people think they have to have like a brand or something like really early on, which I think is sad to see, because there's less of that ability to just be really kind of exploratory and
you feel people have more pressure to become something quicker, kind of?
Yeah, and to be something and to be cohesive with that expression of those things. Like my art has to look kind of like the way I dress, and there's got to be that consistency, which I think is really bad for making art.
Yeah, and it is the Aquarian energy, because a lot of astrologically we're entering the grander age of Aquarius. Is what you're saying, like you cannot bypass your authenticity. Like when you're young, you cannot, like when I was 19 in Concordia, or like 21, I didn't know what I was doing. Like my style, I think I can, if I look back now, I can see like a cohesiveness. But when it was the first time I created art was in university for me. So a lot of young people too, when you're 21, you don't even know who you are. Your brain is not fully developed yet. So like it takes, to know who you are, it takes contrast. You have to have experience on one side, on the dark side, the light side, and through that you start to refine like your sword to be like, okay, this is who I am. And what I find, and you can tell me if that resonates with you, but what you have to offer is connected mostly to what serves you and can serve others. Your true essence is like tapping into your sun. So your sun, yes, it shines out of you and it fuels you, but it also the rays of light touch others and influence them positively, hopefully. And this cannot be found until you kind of explore all the realms of life, most possible. Like your emotions, have you delved with those emotions? Your intellect, have you learned to decipher and through those all those things you think are reality? And then what's your relationship with matter? The 4 elements basically. And I feel like if you're just starting and you have all this pressure from social media and stuff, it can, like you say, be detrimental, because you might want to bypass stuff that needs takes time to be processed. And then you're going to be so identified with it that it's going to become rigid, and so you're going to be stuck in that pattern, not able to evolve past it. That's also like an issue. Is that something you can relate to?
Yeah, definitely. And I think if you're really trying to figure out how you can serve others without figuring out what it is, what your art, if you're not a little bit more searching within yourself and instead trying to figure out how you're going to be, how you're going to promote yourself online or whatever it is, you're going to miss the mark, I think. I think one of the most difficult things to do in making art is just living with that not knowing, like living in a space of not knowing how a painting is going to develop or what the next thing is going to be. And I think through that process, we can really discover a lot.
And that's a big part of your process.
Absolutely, yeah. And then I think at a certain point, we start to realize, what it is, what are those recurring themes in my own work. And then you can start to see, okay, this is maybe my place in the art world or the world at large. But if you put the cart before the horse, it's a lot trickier for sure.
And what would you say what is your thing that you contribute? Like, are you put your heart out? What do you think it has been a theme looking back in your work?
Really just trying to figure out what it is that images are doing, I think. How can we understand ourselves and understand the world through images, and how images act on us, and how they also, I guess, like shape history. So I guess our relationship with images is what I want people to look most closely at. And that's largely been the driving force in my own practice, is just trying to figure out, what are these image experiences that I have? Can they be explained? Can they be better understood? Or are they, just weird coincidences or synchronicities,
And what are the insights you've figured out throughout the years?
Well, especially with that book I mentioned earlier with Francis Yates, The Art of Memory, is I really discovered that in, I guess, pre-modern, especially the late medieval era, there was a completely different relationship with images. Images weren't these kind of things that we explored passively, but they were things that we could kind of build an imaginary space with, in many senses. So the Art of Memory today is better known as memory palaces. But if we think about living in a pre-modern era, especially like theologians or like orators and stuff like that, who have a lot of information to remember, they didn't just have like they might have had a quill and some vellum or something, or like a wax tablet to write on, but it's not like you can just go buy like a ream of paper and just write all these things down, or at least if you could, you would need a scribe or something like that. So there needed to be a much faster way of remembering. And so through this Art of Memory, it was largely an image-based system that people were using. And so you could kind of populate your imagination with these images, and by, I guess, walking through these memory palaces, through these imaginal spaces, you could kind of recall the things that you were meant to be.
Have you heard of the book? I think it's called like Moonwalking with Einstein or something like that.
Someone was mentioning that the other day, actually. Yeah,
that's exactly what
in relation to the Art of Memory stuff.
But it's so crazy because it's this journalist. He's looking for a new topic to study, to look into, and he finds these memory contests. Yeah, and then he's like, how are they doing it? Memorizing like 2 chapters and like just looking at pages in like 1 minute, and then reciting everything. Yeah, exactly. And then the story just gets crazier and crazier, because then he actually is like, oh, so he meets all these specialists. He learns how they're training, and he's like, you know what? I want to learn this. And he spends a year or 2 like studying from their teachers, all the tricks, and with the memory palaces, how to store information there. Yeah. And then he competes, and then he wins. Oh, interesting. So it's like the full story. Oh, I gotta check that out. Yeah, it's fascinating.
I was writing about this stuff a lot with my master's thesis, and so I was watching a lot of like YouTube videos of contemporary. I forget what they call themselves, but people with great memories. And it was really interesting to hear them describe that process, because it totally reflected what Francis Yates was talking about, the Art of Memory. And they had no prior knowledge of that system. It was just something they naturally kind of took to. But it's really amazing. Like they said, like St. Augustine, for example, he could, if someone recited a text to him once, he could repeat it in reverse back to you, like right afterwards, because he was just so used to, using images to store these mnemonic pieces that could be reinterpreted. And it's a much different way that than we use images today.
It's more mental, maybe?
Yeah, more internal for sure. We're just kind of awash with images today, and back then it was much more structured. And you wouldn't see a painting very often, except maybe when you go to the church, unless you were really wealthy or something, or in a book that you were learning in school or something. So these images had a lot more of a profound influence on who people were and how we developed our subjectivities, our consciousness. Another person who writes about this a lot is Mary Carruthers. And I love the line that, it's not so much about what a painting represents, but how it can be used. So how can you see an image, and how can you incorporate this into your personal subconscious, your personal, I guess, consciousness, to help you, to help you learn, or to help you incorporate the things that you want to take from your world.
Yeah, it's crazy in the occult sciences and like you still see this influence, right? Like monks will kind of contemplate, a tattva, which is just a contrasting image or painting for hours, days. And then these paintings open up a world in itself. So like you're saying, even for a painter that can be so valuable, like, or any type of image maker, you want to integrate something in your life, create a piece about it, and contemplate on it daily.
Exactly.
And see what comes. Is that something you do with your own work?
Absolutely. Yeah. And since I've been working with more, I guess I wouldn't say traditional symbols, more religious iconography. I mentioned a little bit, I was in Greece and Turkey doing some research in monasteries. So like painting like St. Luke, or I mentioned St. James and stuff, is all stuff that's happened after my recent trip. And stuff like the net thing that I was talking about, or these other things that seem rather straightforward. I'm amazed that the more I work on them, how they continue to open up and change and make connections with other things that I'm thinking about. So they're very like lively subjects that can really teach you a lot if you pay close enough attention. And painting, I think, is a perfect way to engage with images that way.
And I'm guessing, like, from something I learned, and I'm wondering if it applies to you perhaps, like, you can, to integrate something, for me the best way is to do this, which is a more subjective, right? So you paint something, you get feedback from it as you contemplate, and sometimes you have very genuine experiences with the painting. You know, it can be sensation, it can be vision, it can be different things, but sometimes they're so unknown that you cannot integrate them because you don't understand them. So it takes almost like two tools. You need to also be intellectually kind of learning things from books and to understand how the mind works, how, the more rational part, scientific part about how this works, so that the subjective can be integrated within you. Do you say that this is something that is important in your work too? Yeah,
definitely. I'm always surprised at how I kind of just get obsessed with a certain image or a certain painting. And I'm not sure exactly why I'm been focused on it so much. It might just be something I see in a magazine or at a museum or something like that. But then if that painting does make it into the studio and it's something I start working with, I really start to see how that reflects something important, in my own subjectivity, or something I can bring to my own consciousness, or something that I can pull out of my own subconsciousness perhaps.
And what was I'm sure you might have looked up, like, St. Peter's, what he was standing for and what was his kind of teachings, and you want to share something about that?
Yeah, sure. You mean this one with St. Luke?
Oh yeah, St. Luke.
St. Luke. Yeah. So it was, this is actually a really good example of, I was at the Byzantine and Christian Museum in Athens, and there's just this really great tiny icon by El Greco of St. Luke painting. It wasn't so much the subject matter I was interested in. It was that the whole image was really, really decayed. And so St. Luke was actually almost completely absent. You could only kind of see his hand and his paintbrush, and the rest was kind of, had been eaten away through years and years of neglect, perhaps, or whatever it is. So it was that really drew me to it. And coming back to the studio after that trip, I was really just trying to, I've got thousands of images I can choose from. What's one that I want to kind of start working with? And it ended up being this El Greco painting. But I didn't realize at the time that St. Luke was also the Guild of St. Luke was what painters kind of in the early Renaissance were in Holland, for example. If you wanted to be a painter, you had to be a part of the Guild of St. Luke. So there was all these other resonances that started to appear to me as I started to work with that image. So again, like working with an image that, maybe I was just interested for formal reasons or just because I needed something to work on, ended up being something related specifically to the history of painting. I didn't realize at the time that one of my other favorite images that I saw when I was traveling in the monasteries of Mount Athos, the monastery of St. Dionysius actually has a little icon that is thought to be painted by St. Luke himself. And that was another image that I was just so drawn to. And it wasn't until halfway through this painting where I realized, that's by the same artist as the artist that I'm painting here, or the same saint, So again, it's just surprising that, you make these decisions out of that happenstance or a curiosity. But if you follow that and are open to it, and you take that meditative kind of approach and really are looking and thinking as you do when you're making a painting, these other connections really quickly start to happen, or you attract, I guess, a certain things related to those images or to that seeking.
Is Saint Luke like one of the apostles?
One of the four evangelists.
Okay.
So he was the bull, the ox, I guess.
Okay. Yeah. He's connected with the bull. Yeah.
Okay. I think it's the ox. So what is I can never remember. It's like Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. No. Anyways, again, I wasn't religious, so a lot of these things aren't like cemented into my. But
I do feel like from my studies, like that's why I was asking for the apostles, because I know they have correspondences in the zodiac. There's 12 apostles of zodiac, so I wonder if these four have also correspondences.
Yeah, the cardinal.
The cardinal points.
The cardinal points, I think. Okay. Is the ox in Taurus? Is that
Taurus?
Is that cardinal?
Taurus, no, I don't think so. No, Aries is.
Okay.
So maybe it's Aries.
No, it's definitely Taurus, but maybe it's the fixed signs.
Yeah, perhaps.
I know one's in Scorpio. I can look it up if it's
because it would be interesting. Your moon is in Taurus, so there it feels like the Taurus sign is inside of your mind, and perhaps it's trying to teach you something, through like these mythologies that will open up to you and reveal certainly like part of your dharma, your purpose.
It definitely feels like that with St. Luke for sure. Yeah. And so, it's St. Matthew's, the man, the angel. So I think that's Aquarius. The lion for St. Mark. So Leo. The ox for St. Luke, we were just talking about, for Taurus. And then the eagle for St. John, which is, eagle is also a symbol for Scorpio, if I remember correctly.
Yeah. That's true. That's so interesting. Yeah, I wonder, I do feel like there's a lot. I don't know how the depth of that you went into the symbolism of St. Luke, but it does feel, I don't know, it's an energetic thing, but it does feel like there's a lot coming that's trying to get through to you. I don't know, I'm just sensing that right now.
Yeah.
And you said you are too.
Yeah. And I mean, this painting's almost finished now, but it's definitely an image I want to keep working with. And I don't know if I explained that the net symbolism closely enough, or my process can be kind of confusing, but that synchronicity between the net becoming a painting was just such an amazing moment for me. And
what did it awaken something in you, like a feeling, or?
Well, it was like that I had this intuition or this hunch that, this is an interesting metaphor. Like, a painting's kind of like a net that we can some things pass through it, but other things kind of get caught. And, I paint on burlap, so it's a really wide, or like a loose thread count. Like it kind of is a net in a sense. So some stuff does pass through and some stuff gets stuck on the surface, which is a big part of my process. It's like, maybe I can explore this idea of a net being a symbol for a painting. But it was just kind of a hunch. But then when this happened with the net and the way that it's through happenstance, ended up being exactly where the painting was, in a way that it was nothing I could have ever planned. It's a very complicated composition, and it's really about just reacting to this surface and about how to best integrate the next painting that's going to be attached here. It was just one of those things where so now that intuition, that hunch, is something that I'm like a lot more sure of. Like I'm certain that
it's like something that's coming up. Taurus is the physical body, it's the material. So it's your connection with matter itself. And your moon is in Taurus, which is its exaltation. So it feels like there's something that is trying to get through you about how to, like, whatever signals are coming through you, how to filter them and retain them more consistently, perhaps. Like almost like teaching you how to channel better, or like refine your channeling skills. I don't know. It feels like that, by using your body as a temple that receives the signal and that is connected with health as well. And so, I don't know. I see some theme coming through, and that's just like subjective, of course. But
yeah, No, it'll be interesting to see it where it leads for sure.
Yeah.
I definitely feel like I'm onto something with this new body of work for sure.
And that's there's going to be a few paintings. How much have you done so far?
So there's I guess I've done two paintings based on St. Luke's so far.
Okay.
And so we'll see how this one goes. But it's often I end up working in series. Again, it's difficult to talk about. Like what you're seeing here is actually not a painting, but it's the plate that the painting kind of gets made on. And then it's more like almost like a printmaking process where all of this stuff gets pulled off of the surface onto a painting. So the final painting is going to look more like something else.
Oh, wow. So you're using reversal, so this is the negative kind of?
Yeah. Should I maybe just describe my process a little bit more? Yeah. So I'm often working through a collage methodology, through, I guess, drawing and reusing fragments from old paintings that have been destroyed or offcuts from old paintings. And those things kind of get made into these kind of collage-like structures on the wall. And once I get to a good point where like a lot of the compositional things feel kind of resolved, and I'm happy with the subject and kind of where it's going, that image gets completely cut up and almost destroyed in a way. And all of that information gets translated onto a wooden board like this, where everything gets mapped out. And then I start kind of digging into the actual surface of the plywood, routering stuff out, carving stuff out, painting directly on the board. And this process kind of goes back and forth for a while, but eventually at the end, a painting gets mounted onto this board. Again, I work with burlap because it's got a really wide thread count where I push gesso through the back with a squeegee.
Okay.
And then that causes the everything on this surface to get stuck to the burlap stretcher, and then it gets removed, kind of peeled away from.
So, for example, this won't stick on.
It will stick. Yeah.
Oh, not just the white part, but everything.
Everything here, yeah, will stick more or less. I'm kind of there's a lot of surprises that happen. That's why I like this process. So the result of the painting, I'm often like I don't know how I do some of the things. The longer this goes on, I'm pretty aware of what's going to stick and what's not going to stick. But yeah, onto the plywood, I put like a bunch of I think a resist material. Like sometimes it's wax or just like an oil soap, so that nothing sticks to the wood and everything is going to be sure to be peeled off.
Interesting. So I guess that's a big part of what you also bring students in your classes to, to integrate is like the non-control a little bit and be more intuitive with the process.
For sure, yeah. How to listen to your materials, listen to what the experience of you in a painting, that engagement, that reciprocal relationship between you and the work, as opposed to trying to always just, I've got this idea, I'm going to execute it. Because I can find that it can be a little bit disappointing. It's like, oh, but I did exactly what I wanted to do, but it's still not a good painting. At the end, if I'm surprised and it's like, I'm not even sure how I did that, that's when I know I'm onto something good. It's like, it's a surprise, and it's, it keeps opening up and making me want to keep looking at it because it's kind of out of my control. Yeah,
that's cool. It's also, it keeps your ego in check sometimes also when you're, those big artists that are like, this is all me, this is, but at some point it's like, it is me that is moving the pieces, but the end thing, it's like out of your control, right? It's like, you can call it chance, but it's not chance. It's actually like I feel like it's something deeper than that.
Yeah, me too. Yeah. And for me, that's really like the mystery of painting, and what keeps me coming back to the studio is trying to figure out what is it that's actually at work here? What are images doing? How do they function? And in a sense, that was my big departure into Western esotericism when I started to discover things like image magic, or even more simple things like making sigils, making talismans, astrological imagery, how those images are thought to be these kind of centers or nexuses for kind of astral forces or something like that. And I was like, okay, wow, here's a tradition that gives this idea of image agency, the idea that images kind of have their own will or their ability to alter or make change in the material world. The Western esoteric tradition is one that really puts that at the forefront. And so when I was in school, I was really using that as a great example of how we can take those kind of methodologies and use them in the studio to understand the way that images might work.
That's so interesting.
And then I really noticed that there's this correspondence with these more esoteric beliefs to more mainstream religious use, and that's why I was in Greece and Turkey looking at icons. Because here we have almost the same kind of image function, where they've got all these stories of miraculous images that can heal the sick, images that can travel on their own, images that cry or have like a perfume emanating from them. And obviously it's very different from the esoteric tradition because it's tied to the representation of these divinities, mostly Jesus and the Virgin. Whereas in the more esoteric tradition, it's much more, it doesn't even have to be connected to anything. It can be just the material itself, or these larger kind of astrological symbols or something as well. But it's the same kind of mechanism at work.
I'm curious, recently I took a course in alchemy, but specifically to Byzantine painting, and how like how they would layer pigments is very important to the layering of, when they would paint a saint, it would be very symbolic of like painting their flesh first with like brown tones, earth tones as a background, and building up, and it would represent almost the layers of like the physical, the astral, the mental, the spiritual.
Oh, amazing.
And the last pigment would be the most rare and pure pigment, like lapis lazuli and these kind of pigments that are very hard to find back then anyways.
Yeah.
And this would represent, for them, it would be an alchemical process as they're painting it, to remember how they are constructed as well. And so the final product, when people would see it, would be very energetic because of that. And also because they were natural pigments. You know? And I've questioned myself lately, like, what is the difference between like a chemical pigment and what we're talking about for energy to be transmitted? And is there a difference with these rock pigments that actually rocks absorb energy, can absorb light more than like molecules that are synthesized?
Right.
So I've been dealing with that myself in my paintings. Like, is this something you've thought about?
Oh, yeah, definitely. Well, I mean, maybe not in such a religious or spiritual sense, but I definitely like, it's a conversation with a lot of my students. They're like, oh, why do I need to paint in oils? Can I just use acrylic? I like the drying time. But there's been so many cases where students like finish a project with acrylic and it, just the next day it looks like dead. Like everything looks so plasticky and kind of dull. And they see other people's paint. They're like, whoa, that's oil. Look at like the difference in the colors. And that's, definitely something I've noticed in my own practice for a long time, the difference between synthetic pigments and true, like a really good cadmium or, even some of the nice earth tones, like a good burnt sienna or yellow ochre. They're just alive, and they continue to be alive. One of my favorite painters, Harold Clunder, he talks about how, the colors become way more true over time, even over 50, 100 years in some cases. The paintings continue to, like, oil paint doesn't actually dry, it cures. It's actually a chemical reaction that's happening. And it sometimes can be a really long process as well. Whereas with acrylics, it's dry within a couple of days.
I remember, last summer I went to the Louvre, and I remember staring at these ancient Byzantine paintings for so long, because I had never seen this color so pure, like so resonant, so rich. Yeah. And I took the course a bit before that, and something that they did do that I remember from that course, for some pigments, to get this extra brightness from them, they would mix some dairy pigment, like dairy, I don't know what to call it, but like lactose products in the pigment, so that when it dries, it creates kind of this reflective coat on the pigment. And of course, what you put under, so they would have many layers of this technique, so that it really shines like almost like a colored mirror.
Amazing. Yeah.
And I was like, okay. And it's like satin, so it's not like mirror, like glossy that you can see yourself through it, but it's really like as if light is shining through it. Yeah. I thought that was fascinating. All those subtle techniques that are lost most of the time. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But like, it does give you this sense of awe, like when you see a painting like that. And they've been so well restored as well. Yeah. They're just glowing. The colors are vibrating next to each other. And it's an amazing experience to behold. Yeah. I'm curious about this course that you took with alchemy and Byzantine. Yeah, painting. It's, what's his name? Something Côte Noire, Brian Côte Noire. He's from, I think, USA, but he was teaching a course in New York. Okay. I can link up. He's an alchemist, like he does actually alchemy.
Yeah.
He does his own chemical reactions, like how they would do stained glass was by making their own chemical reactions to get this color that otherwise you could not find anywhere to like make your glass stained.
Yeah. Yeah.
So he's got the real esoteric correspondences and how they would actually do it.
Right.
I'll link you up with it. Yeah, I think it could be interesting.
Yeah, that would be great. Because that was a big part of my reason of wanting to go to Mount Athos and some of these other monasteries, is because I was reading about these connections that Byzantine icon painting had with the art of memory, had with alchemical traditions. And when I went to a lot of these monasteries that are still in operation and met some of the iconographers who were still making paintings, they followed all these like protocols and ideas that I had read about, but they didn't. It was like they didn't know why they were doing it. Yeah. It had just been inherited and a part of that tradition. So when I asked them about alchemy or mnemonics or the art of memory, they're just like, I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know what you mean. But
and that's, I feel like the age we're living in is the age of truth, where all of these structures that have been diluted, there's some stuff that is emerging from the under and emerging through people like Brian Cote-Noir, who is teaching these little classes here and there.
Yeah.
But there's a few people that are themselves artists and channels that are bringing this old information back. That has been even in secret societies. The techniques they use, sometimes they don't even understand them fully. They've been diluted.
Right.
The technique has been altered. And the essence of those ancient Egyptian and even older rites are kind of diluted with time. And I do feel this, we are right now in the age of truth. Destruction and truth. Because once the structures that are kind of manipulating truth fall, then you see through everything. So there's nowhere that truth can hide. It's just right in front of you.
Yeah.
So I do think we're going to see more and more in the future.
We'll find out.
Well, we are finding out. The DD case we just mentioned.
Yeah.
That's so a big one and an obvious one. Like, and it feels like every day there's more stuff that, like, they went into his basement and they found like these tunnels and like,
oh God.
What the fuck is going on?
Yeah.
So,
wow.
Yeah, maybe to end, do you have a question you wished I had asked you, or something that's been like on your heart lately that you think could be valuable to share to others?
Collage has been a real big part of my practice for a long time. And so that's been something really interesting to me, is to dig a little bit deeper into the history of collage. It's been really fun to kind of realizing the connections between collage and modern art, for example. Obviously, we think of the history as being starting with like Picasso and Braque, for example, and kind of moving on through the Dadaists and the Surrealists, and eventually to like abstract expressionism. I think the collage methodology was still kind of at work there. But I think there's a whole other kind of esoteric reading of the history of collage. And I just actually bought the Psychic Bible from the Temple of Psychic Youth. I don't know if you're familiar with like Genesis Peorage, a lot of musical connections in 1970s London, bands like Throbbing Gristle and Psychic TV.
Oh, okay.
Are you familiar? No.
No.
I'll share some of that with you. But so there was also a big connection with them and collage and sigils and stuff like this, largely transmitted through the work of William Burroughs and Brian Geisen. So that's something that's been really, I guess, fascinating me recently, is how these, I was taught collage, and it seems like just one of these methods kind of pulled from modern art, when really there's a real kind of esoteric kind of ideas kind of in that methodology, especially through people like Burroughs and Geisen, who really do link it with a type of magical act in a certain sense.
Like chaos magic?
Yeah, definitely tied to chaos magic, especially through the Temple of Psychic Youth. They were very much more aligned with chaos magic. And Burroughs is kind of a hard one to figure out. He was really interested in the occult, but there's no kind of overlay of what kind of systems he was using and stuff like that. But for him, it was largely that these kind of systems of control. He really thought that language was the way that the populations are kind of controlled. And for him, cutting up language and reconnecting it to different ideas can, kind of be a screen for our own kind of subconscious, but also a way for us to break these kind of systems of control in many ways.
So like, how would you apply this to the day we're living, like to today, to bring this knowledge back?
Well, I just think that even when you think you're doing a more kind of formal rearranging of certain elements in a painting or a collage or a work of art or something, that there can be a lot more kind of at stake or a lot more happening than just these formal kind of considerations.
Yeah, more than you rational thinking mind knows. I mean, like perhaps there's all these equations in your unconscious that are breaking through because you allow it in this kind of disconstructed way. Sort of.
And if you're open to it, I think you can really start to follow your intuition. And again, I guess we can have that experience of making it work, and it's not you just projecting onto it, but it's something that projects back, and it becomes a reciprocal thing that can help lead to making a good painting, but also help lead us to being better people, to understanding ourselves and our place in the world. Yeah, I guess it's just fresh on my mind because I've been reading that new book that I got and stuff like that. But it really seems like a great technique for how to get. No, I lost the train of thought. Sorry.
No, but I do get it. Yeah, it seems like it is a way to get out of your way in a way, so that you can. Like Moon and Taurus, it is your superpower to use the moon, the reflective side of our existence. Usually, we just use the sun, what we see. But the moon is what makes us evolve, when the sun hits the moon, it reflects back light. And this feedback loop is the most valuable thing we have. And it's very strong in your chart. And I think that's what you're trying to communicate, is this tool that's so valuable to use these kind of techniques to break the patterns of the rational, that this is what you do, then this, and you get this result, which is the safe thing to do, right? When you let go of the control, then something bigger than you can come through.
Yeah.
And that's when so much value is reflected back to you.
Yeah, very well put.
So I do get that, and I think it is, what I was telling you earlier, Roze Umbra is about uniting both the sun and the moon. It is, I think, something that needs to be more brought to the surface, and I think I'm very glad that that's something that is active in you, and that you have also students and people that you share this with, because it is the most valuable tool. Because otherwise you just stay in the same patterns, and then something happens and then you suffer because you're not flexible. You're too rigid with your process.
Right. Yeah.
So.
Yeah, and I really think through making art, whatever methods it are, it really does help us kind of understand ourselves and I guess that ties into my interest in the nature of images and image agency, that we can start to use these images to not just understand ourselves, but also how we can construct future selves, or if there's things we don't like about ourselves, we can use images to explore those things and how to improve ourselves as well.
Yeah, totally. And then I feel like this way of thinking of improving yourself naturally will improve the collective as well. Because if you are more introspective, it brings more compassion as well.
Yeah.
When you know yourself better, and compassion is what's lacking in our interactions. You project onto others stuff that you have not processed with yourself. Art is a powerful tool to process those things, and the end product is compassion, I think.
Yeah, absolutely.
Which is what our world needs. So.
Yeah. No, it's amazing through the painting process, the thoughts and memories that come up. It's and sometimes really difficult ones that I have never thought about before. And it's only through that painting process of focusing your attention onto something else, almost entering it's almost like a trance or a flow state, a meditative state, where these things things that you haven't necessarily resolved can come back to you. And then you've got a material in front of you that you can actually respond to help, I guess, work through those ideas or issues.
Yeah, it's like a psychologist that reflects exactly like what you need in that moment. And that's cheaper probably than a psychologist.
I think so too. I think we'd all be a lot better off if everyone just had a studio.
Yeah, well, for those that don't, it's not limiting. Like I was painting in my living room for many years.
You have just a space where you can feel free to make a little bit of a mess.
When there's no judgment, then you can be yourself and, like you say, put some blankets on the floor or whatever, cardboards, and just be messy with it.
That's right.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for this podcast. I think there was so much value packed in it, and so many people will benefit from your work, how you perceive work, and I think you're the route you've taken to understand yourself through art is very inspiring. So thank you for sharing this.
Yeah, happy to talk. And yeah, I felt like we could have talked for another 4 or 5 hours.
I'm sure. And there's more seasons to come. So you hopefully will be a recurring guest.
That'll be great to talk again.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks for watching, everyone. Hope you guys enjoyed this episode. And if you did, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. It means a lot and it helps the channel grow. And also, don't forget to go follow us on Instagram and follow James' socials as well, so that you can see what's coming with his art shows and also have more details on the art grant that's coming real soon with Roze Umbra. So until next time, much love and peace to all.